I still remember that sound clearly. The door slammed shut behind me, not because of the wind, but because my own daughter pushed it hard. The snow was falling so heavily I couldn't see the end of the street. I stood there, my hands trembling from the cold, while she spoke in a voice as calm as if she were reading a utility bill. I can't support another person who no longer earns money. I raised her alone for more than 30 years, and in just one white, snow-filled afternoon, I was erased from her life like an expense that was no longer necessary. But in that very moment, I didn't cry. I did something my daughter and the entire world never expected. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 63 years old, born and raised in the state of Ohio. My entire life has been tied to bitter winter mornings, salt-covered roads, and a rhythm so steady many people would call it boring. I was never a woman with grand dreams. All I wanted was a peaceful life, a warm home, an honest job, and a child raised properly. For 32 years, I worked at the same insurance company in Columbus. I started there when my hair was still black, when Lauren was just learning to walk. I stayed until gray crept in and my back began to ache whenever the weather turned cold. I was always there 15 minutes early, making coffee before work, organizing paperwork for the whole team. I remembered every co-worker's name, their birthdays, even the names of children I'd never met but had heard about for years. I believed in something very American, very old-fashioned. If you work hard and stay loyal, you will be treated fairly. I believed dedication mattered. I believed age was experience, not a burden. Until that Friday afternoon, my supervisor called me into the office with a politeness so cold it sent a chill through me. "Evelyn, we need to talk." I already knew what was coming. Over the past 2 months, older women in the department had been disappearing one by one. Desks emptied out. Potted plants were removed without explanation. They used the word restructuring. They said it had nothing to do with performance. They placed a thin envelope in front of me. 2 weeks of severance. 2 weeks of pay for more than 30 years of service. I signed the papers with a hand that was strangely calm, thanked them for the opportunity, and walked out of the building like a polite visitor who had simply wandered into the wrong place. On the bus ride home, I watched familiar shops slide past the fogged-up windows. I thought about Lauren. I thought about how I would tell her, not because I was afraid she'd be angry, but because I knew she was more worried about money than ever. I had lived with Lauren's family for nearly 5 years. After my husband passed away, and after I sold my small apartment to help her with the down payment on the house. Back then, Lauren cried, hugged me, and said, "Mom, you're my lifesaver." I believed her. I believed family was a safe place. Lauren's house was in a quiet neighborhood, rows of similar homes with neatly trimmed lawns. I walked in and took off my shoes like always. Jason was on the couch, a can of beer in his hand, eyes fixed on a basketball game I didn't care about. He nodded at me but said nothing. My 2 grandchildren ran out of the living room. "Grandma!" They wrapped their arms around my legs, the familiar scent of children's soap softening my heart. It was the only moment that day when I still felt like I belonged. Lauren was in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice tight. I caught fragments. Payment? Past due? Just 1 more week. When she hung up, her shoulders sagged. I stood there, my purse still in my hand, and said the sentence I had practiced the entire bus ride. "Lauren, I lost my job today." She turned to look at me. First came surprise, then very quickly her expression changed. Not worry, not sympathy, calculation, as if an invisible spreadsheet had appeared in front of her eyes. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice rising. I repeated it slowly, explained. "They're restructuring. I have 2 weeks of severance. I'll look for another job." Lauren didn't answer right away. She sat down, fingers interlaced. "Do you know Jason is unemployed?" she said. "Do you know we haven't paid this month's mortgage yet?" I nodded. I had helped them so many times before, small amounts that grew larger and larger. I never asked for anything back. I thought that was what a mother did. "Then you understand," Lauren continued, her voice turning cold. "I can't take on any more." I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Take on?" I repeated. "Mom," she sighed, "you don't have income. I can't support another adult who doesn't earn money." The words fell between us like a heavy object. Jason never looked up. The TV kept blaring the cheers of the crowd. I stood there, looking at my daughter, the child I once held through sleepless nights, and I didn't recognize her anymore. Lauren avoided my eyes. "You should find somewhere else to stay for now," she said, "just temporarily. Once you get back on your feet, then—" Outside the window, snow began to fall. Big, heavy flakes covered the walkway in front of the house. The morning forecast had warned of a storm. I looked outside, then back at my daughter. "Now?" I asked. Lauren was silent for 1 second too long. Then she nodded, very slightly. I went upstairs and packed a few necessities. I could hear the children laughing downstairs, unaware that their grandmother was being erased from their lives. When I pulled my suitcase to the door, Lauren was already standing there. She opened it. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't hug me. The door slammed shut, not because of the wind. I stood on the porch as snow began to settle on my shoulders. My breath turned to steam. And in that moment, I understood something painfully clear. I hadn't just lost my job. I had been pushed out of my own family. I didn't stand there long. The snow crept into my collar, the cold seeping through my old coat. I dragged my suitcase down the steps and walked slowly toward the curb, where yellow streetlights cast a glow over the white ground. Each step sounded soft, but inside my head, the noise was deafening. 30 years. The number kept repeating in my mind, steady as the ticking clock on the wall of my old office. 30 years, I was never late. 30 years, I never took a day off unless I was truly sick. 30 years, I believed that if I did things right, lived honestly, life wouldn't be too cruel. I remembered my first morning at that insurance company. I was in my early 30s. Lauren couldn't even read yet. I wore a light blue dress I bought on sale, lunch packed the night before. The office was small and outdated, but full of hope. I was the youngest woman there, always volunteering for the tasks no one wanted. I learned quickly. I took careful notes. I didn't complain. When the company changed systems, I stayed late to learn the new software. When coworkers went on maternity leave, I took on extra work without asking for more pay. I was proud of being reliable. There were days I left the office long after dark, rushing home to cook dinner for Lauren. I ate a few quick bites, then sat at the kitchen table reviewing paperwork for the next day. I never thought of it as sacrifice. I thought it was simply the duty of a mother, of an honest worker. I believed that so deeply I never questioned it, until the past few years when things began to change, quietly, slowly, like cold air slipping through a crack you don't notice at first. Familiar faces disappeared. Patricia, who sat across from me for more than 20 years, was let go early. Linda, who brought homemade cookies every Friday, vanished after a closed-door meeting. They were all older. They all had the same confused look as they packed their things. At first, I reassured myself, maybe they retired willingly. Maybe the company gave them a package. I didn't want to think further. Then it was my turn. No thank you, no apology. Just a thin envelope and 2 weeks of severance. 2 weeks for 30 years. I held that envelope and felt no anger, only emptiness, as if someone had erased a part of my life with a few printed words. Standing outside my daughter's house, snow falling around my feet, I finally understood what it felt like to be discarded by society. No one says, "You're useless." All the doors just close at once. When you're young, they call you potential. When you're middle-aged, they call you experience. When you grow old, all they see is cost. I no longer had economic value. That was the cold truth I faced that afternoon. I sat down on the bus bench near Lauren's house. The stop was empty, snow piling up on the metal roof. I set my suitcase at my feet, hands resting on my knees, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid. Not a passing fear, but a deep, slow fear that took root. I was afraid of old age without money, afraid of waking up one day with nowhere to belong, afraid of having to beg, afraid of becoming exactly what my daughter had just called me, a person who no longer earns money. I thought about my old apartment, the one I sold to help Lauren buy this house. When I signed those papers, I smiled, believing I was investing in my child's future. I never kept a backup plan for myself. Back then, I believed family was the best insurance. I was wrong. The snow fell harder. The wind cut through my coat, making me shiver. And in that moment, images of Lauren as a child surfaced with painful clarity. She once had a high fever on a snowy night, and I carried her on foot to the emergency room because the car wouldn't start. She once sobbed when her father left, and I held her, promising I would never abandon her. She once told me as a teenager, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know." I had lived up to that promise. She hadn't. I didn't blame Lauren right then. I only asked myself over and over, like a needle that wouldn't stop pricking, where did I go wrong? Did I raise her too fragile when it came to money? Did I sacrifice so much that she stopped seeing the value of that sacrifice? Or did I teach everyone, by always putting myself last, that this was simply where I belonged? Those questions followed me through that long evening. When the last bus of the day arrived, I stepped on and took a seat by the window. Outside, lit-up houses passed in silence. Somewhere, families were sitting down to dinner, sharing small stories around the table. And there I was, 63 years old, jobless, homeless, and realizing that 30 years of loyalty were worth exactly 2 weeks of pay, and not even enough to keep me in my own daughter's house. I leaned my head against the cold glass and closed my eyes. There were no tears left, only a terrifying emptiness and a question with no answer yet. The bus stopped in front of a low, aging building, tucked between 2 abandoned warehouses. The sign out front was faded by snow and time, only a few words still readable. Women's Transitional Shelter. I pulled my suitcase down, its wheels catching on the icy curb with a sharp clack that made my head ache. I stood in front of the heavy metal door for a few seconds, not because I hesitated, but because I needed a moment to accept the truth. 63 years old, I, Evelyn Carter, was about to step into a shelter for homeless women. The door opened with a long creak. Warm air mixed with the smell of disinfectant rushed into my face. Not the smell of a hospital, but the smell of places that try to cover exhaustion with cleanliness. A middle-aged woman behind the reception desk looked up, her eyes tired, but not unkind. She asked my name, my date of birth, and a few familiar questions, as if she had asked them hundreds of times before. When I answered, my voice was so calm it surprised even me, as if everything had crossed some invisible line where shame no longer had the power to make me tremble. Inside, the space was large but bare. Pale beige walls, fluorescent lights casting a cold glow, whispered conversations, slippers dragging on the floor, soft coughing, all blending into a steady, sorrowful hum. I looked around and realized something that tightened my chest. Many of the women here looked like me. Not the images people usually imagine when they hear homeless. No madness, no torn clothes, just tired faces, eyes that once knew family dinner tables, living rooms with curtains, evenings watching the 6 o'clock news. A gray-haired woman sat clutching an old cloth bag. Another carefully folded a sweater as if it were the most valuable thing she owned. I saw pieces of myself in them, women who once had addresses, roles, people who called them family. I was led up an old metal staircase that creaked with every step. The hallway on the second floor was long and narrow, small windows fogged over. The staff member pointed to a bunk bed in the corner. "Bottom bunk," she said. "That window leaks a bit. Close the curtain if it gets cold." The bunk bed was metal, white paint chipped in places. The mattress was thin, the white sheet washed so many times it was worn. Near the window, a small gap let cold air slip in, carrying the chill of the snowy night. I set my suitcase beside the bed, sat on the edge, and felt the metal frame vibrate lightly under my weight. I had slept in better beds than this, many times, but I had never felt this lost. Night fell slowly. The hallway lights dimmed, leaving only a faint glow in the room. I lay there, pulling the blanket up to my chin, listening to the wind whistle through the crack in the window. Each gust made the curtain flutter, casting shifting shadows on the wall like nameless figures. I couldn't sleep. My eyes closed and opened again. Lauren's image kept appearing in my mind, not her cold face as she closed the door, but her as a little girl, hair in pigtails, grinning as she showed off a newly lost baby tooth. I thought about my grandchildren. I wondered if they would wake up in the morning and ask where Grandma was, or if they would quickly get used to her absence. That thought hurt more than the cold. I turned toward the wall, trying to stop the thoughts. But the feeling of being replaced crept in, persistent, as if I had finished my role and now there was no place for me anymore. I had been a mother, a model employee, someone people needed, and now I was just a bunk bed that could be filled by anyone else once I left. For a moment, I wondered if sacrificing so much had been a mistake, if keeping my apartment, keeping a little selfishness, might have changed everything. But those questions brought no answers, only made my chest feel heavier. A woman in the opposite bunk shifted in her sleep and let out a very soft sigh. That sound made me realize I wasn't alone in this loss. Everyone here had a story, a fall, a door that had been shut. I lay there for a long time, listening to my heartbeat slow down, and in that cold silence, another thought began to form, slowly but clearly. I had lost so much today, but I was still alive. I was still breathing, and if life had already pushed me all the way to the bottom like this, then at the very least, I had nothing left to lose. I turned my face toward the ceiling, staring at the faint cracks under the weak light. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I only whispered to myself, like a promise meant for no one else to hear. If I survived tonight, If I still have the strength to stand up tomorrow, I will never let anyone step on me again. Outside, the snow kept falling, but for the first time since the door at Lauren's house slammed shut, I felt something very small, very fragile inside me. Not hope, but clarity. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the light snapping on suddenly at 6 a.m. There was no alarm clock, no familiar smell of coffee, just the shuffling sound of slippers on the floor and a staff member's steady voice announcing breakfast. My body felt heavy as lead. I had barely slept the night before. Still, I sat up and carefully folded my blanket out of old habit, the habit of someone who once believed that small order could keep life from completely falling apart. After a simple breakfast of watery oatmeal and a weak cup of coffee, we were asked to line up at the end of the hallway. A small sign hung on the wall read, "Health Screening, Mandatory for New Residents, Mandatory Health Screening." I wasn't surprised. Places like this have to make sure there are no contagious diseases. I stood in line with the other women, all of us silent, eyes drifting without focus. Someone coughed dryly. Someone else clutched an old coat tightly, like a fragile layer of protection. The medical room was at the end of the first floor, small and so clean it felt out of place in the aging building. A few posters hung on the walls advising people to quit smoking, monitor blood pressure, eat healthy. Good advice, but it sounded like a luxury to people who didn't know where they'd sleep that night. When it was my turn, I walked in and sat on the plastic chair beside the exam table. The nurse looked up and smiled, not overly cheerful, but genuine. That alone eased my tension a little. She introduced herself as Hannah Lewis, early 40s, brown hair neatly tied back, thin-framed glasses. Her eyes were calm, used to broken stories, but still gentle enough that I didn't feel like just another file. "We'll check your blood pressure, heart rate, and take a little blood for basic tests," she said, her voice even and soft. "Just routine." I nodded. I had no expectations at all. At my age, every test comes with a quiet fear: diabetes, heart disease, cancer. I had prepared myself to hear another piece of bad news. I think I believed I no longer had the strength to be surprised again. Hannah wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. The numbers made her frown slightly before she wrote something down. "A bit high," she said. "Stress lately?" I gave a faint smile. "You could say that." She didn't ask more. Some answers don't need digging into. Then she prepared the needle. I turned my head to the side and stared at the poster in front of me. A smiling family around a dinner table, an image so familiar it hurt. The needle pierced my skin. A small, familiar sting. A small vial slowly filled with my blood. The dark red liquid that had flowed through me for more than 60 years, raised a child, carried me through countless working days. I had never thought about my blood that way. To me, it had always just existed, quiet, anonymous, like me for so many years. Hannah labeled the vial and wrote my name, Evelyn Carter. Seeing my name printed on that white label gave me a strange feeling, as if, for the first time in a long while, my name was attached to something specific. "We'll have the results in 1 or 2 days," she said. "If there's anything we need to look at, I'll let you know." I thanked her, stood up, and left the medical room without thinking much more about it. At that moment, my only simple thought was, I hope nothing serious shows up. The next 2 days crawled by. I went to the public library to stay warm and read newspapers. I scanned job listings, even though deep down I knew my age was an invisible wall. I returned to the shelter at night, ate dinner in silence, then lay back down on the bunk bed near the drafty window. On the third day, as I was lining up for lunch, a staff member came looking for me. "Evelyn Carter," she called. "Nurse Hannah would like to see you." My heart tightened. In that instant, I thought, this is it. I followed her down to the medical room, each step heavier than the last. Hannah was standing by the desk, flipping through a folder. When she saw me, she looked up, and right then, I noticed something unusual. Not worry, not pity, but hesitation. She pulled out a chair and motioned for me to sit. "Evelyn," she began, slower than usual, "I need to talk to you about your test results." I clasped my hands tightly on my lap. "Is something wrong?" I asked, bracing myself for the familiar words. Hannah took a breath. "Not in the way you're thinking," she said. "Actually, your results are quite unusual." I frowned. At my age, unusual is never a comforting word. "Your basic numbers are fine," Hannah continued. "But during the blood tests, we found that you have a very rare type of antibody." I looked at her, confused. "An antibody?" She nodded and explained briefly, just enough for me to follow. "Some people, very rare, have unique immune traits, and I, based on the initial results, might be one of them. We need to run more advanced tests to confirm," Hannah said. "But if it's true, your blood could help another patient." I let out a soft laugh, not because it was funny. "Are you saying I have some strange disease?" I asked. "Or that I'm about to—" "No," Hannah interrupted firmly. "You don't have a dangerous illness, at least not from what we can see." I exhaled, but I still didn't understand. "Then what is it?" Hannah looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing every word. "There's a patient at one of our partner hospitals," she said. "An older man in a coma. Standard treatments are no longer working. His family is searching for experimental options." I stayed silent. Each word seemed to move through the air very slowly. "Your antibodies," Hannah continued, "may be compatible with a therapy like that. If additional tests confirm it, your blood could save his life." The room seemed to shrink. I looked down at my hands that once wiped my child's nose, typed thousands of insurance files, trembled in the snowy wind just days ago. "You're saying, save his life?" I asked, my voice rough. Hannah nodded. "It's possible. No one can promise anything, but the possibility is real." I didn't know how to react. My thoughts were spinning. I had prepared myself for bad news, not for this. "The patient's family," Hannah went on, gentle but clear, "is willing to pay a very large amount for this experimental therapy because it isn't covered by insurance." I looked up at her. "A large amount?" She nodded. She didn't say the number, but her eyes said everything. I sat there unable to speak. A strange feeling spread through me. Not joy, not exactly fear, but total shock. 3 days ago, I had been thrown out of a house because I no longer earned money. 3 days ago, I was a burden. And now, the only thing I had left, my own body, carried a value I had never imagined. I thought about Lauren, about the door slamming shut, about her cold words. Then I looked back at Hannah. "What do you need me to do?" I asked quietly. Hannah smiled, and in her eyes was something that looked like respect. "First, you need to know the choice is entirely yours," she said. "No one can force you." I just thought, "You should know that you are not worthless. You never were." Those words hit me harder than any diagnosis. I left the medical room walking slowly. The hallway looked the same, the lights just as cold, the other women still sitting in silence. But inside me, something had shifted. For the first time since the door at Lauren's house closed, I no longer felt erased. The only thing I had left turned out to have value. That day, Hannah drove me herself to the hospital. The air was still cold, snow not yet fully melted along the curb, but the sky was brighter than it had been in days. The car passed through downtown Columbus, where tall glass buildings reflected the pale winter sunlight. I had lived here nearly my entire life, yet this time everything looked unfamiliar, as if I were stepping into a world I had never been allowed to touch before. The hospital rose in front of me, large and silent, a pale concrete structure with endless rows of windows. The parking lot was nearly full. Ambulances moved in and out, lights flashing in the cold haze. I stood at the entrance for a few seconds, pulling my collar higher, my palms sweating despite the low temperature. I had brought Lauren to this hospital when she was little, during bouts of pneumonia or high fever. Back then, I was the anxious mother, gripping her hand, ready to do anything to protect her. Now I walked in alone, in a completely different role. Not a family member, not medical staff. I was a homeless woman carrying something whose value I barely understood. We took the elevator up. When the doors opened, a familiar smell hit me, the sharper scent of disinfectant, metal, and the cold air of medical equipment. The sign was clear: ICU, Intensive Care Unit. I swallowed. Hannah led me down a long hallway where machines hummed steadily, like the mechanical breathing of the entire floor. Through glass windows, I saw brightly lit rooms, bodies lying motionless, tubes and wires everywhere. Each room held a story suspended between life and death. We stopped in front of a room at the end of the hall. Hannah knocked softly, then opened the door. A woman stood up when we entered. She looked to be in her early 70s, slender silver hair neatly combed. She wore a light gray sweater and dark slacks, simple, understated. But what caught my attention most were her eyes, red from lack of sleep, yet holding an unusual calm. "Are you Evelyn?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. I nodded. Yes. She stepped forward and took my hands in both of hers. Her hands were warm, slightly trembling. "I'm Margaret Bennett," she said, "Richard's wife." I didn't know what to say. I only felt the way she held my hands, not like grasping a lifeline, but like holding another human being. No pleading, no pressure, just quiet gratitude, without any promises demanded. Through the glass behind her, I saw the man lying in the hospital bed. He was thinner than I expected, silver-haired, his face so still it almost didn't seem real. The machines around him beeped steadily, reminding us that his life was being held in place by technology. Richard Bennett, Hannah said quietly beside me, 74 years old. I had heard that name somewhere before, on the news, in evening business reports when I still lived with Lauren, a successful businessman who built a large logistics company from nothing. But seeing him there, I didn't see wealth or power. I saw a man sleeping very deeply and a wife waiting for him to wake up. We stepped into the waiting area, where the lights were softer. A doctor approached, introduced himself and his title, then invited us to sit. He spoke slowly and carefully, choosing each word as if afraid of breaking something fragile hanging between us. He explained that Richard had a rare immune disorder that led to severe neurological complications. Standard treatments were no longer effective. He emphasized that the therapy they were considering was experimental, with no clear precedent and no guarantee of success. I listened, but my mind drifted. I watched Margaret sitting beside me, hands clasped, back straight, eyes fixed on the doctor. She didn't interrupt. She didn't press for answers. She listened like someone who had heard similar explanations too many times, yet still hadn't let go of hope. "We need completely voluntary consent," the doctor said, turning to me. "You have no obligation to do this, and you must understand the risks for both sides." I nodded. I didn't feel cornered. No one looked at me like a commodity. No one said I had to do this. That, more than anything, made me tremble. Then the doctor mentioned the compensation. The number was spoken lightly, professionally, as if it were just an administrative detail, but it landed in my ears like a stone. $500,000. I heard every syllable clearly. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I just sat there staring at my worn shoes, the scuffs on the toes, trying not to laugh or cry at the absurdity of life. $500,000, an amount large enough to completely change the rest of my life. I thought about the small apartment I once had, about not having to line up at the shelter every night, about never again seeing the calculating look in my daughter's eyes whenever money came up. I imagined a small house with sunlit windows, with a table where I could sit and drink my morning coffee without anyone asking, "When are you leaving?" I also thought about Lauren, about what she had said. Someone who no longer earns money. I wondered what kind of look she would give me if she knew that number, but I didn't say it out loud. Not to the doctor, not to Margaret, and certainly not to my daughter. "I need time to think," I said, finally finding my voice. Margaret squeezed my hand gently. "Whatever you decide," she said, "I'm still grateful that you came here." That sentence, no demands, no strings attached, made my chest ache. I realized how accustomed I had become to being asked, to being used, to the point where this simple, genuine respect left me unsettled. On the way back to the shelter, I sat quietly in the car. Hannah didn't ask whether I had decided yet. She just drove, giving me the space I needed. That night, I lay on the familiar bunk bed, staring at the ceiling. The wind whistled through the crack in the window. Everything was the same, but I wasn't. I knew I would agree, not just because of the money, but because for the first time in a long while I had the right to choose, and that choice could give me a life that no longer depended on anyone's unpredictable goodwill. I closed my eyes, the decision already clear in my heart, and I knew one thing for sure. Lauren would not know about this. At least, not yet. 3 days after the hospital meeting, just as I returned to the shelter after a long, dragging afternoon at the public library, the staff on duty called my name from the end of the hallway. "Evelyn Carter, you have a phone call." I froze. Not many people knew I was here. In fact, almost no one did. I hadn't called Lauren. I hadn't called any relatives either. That silence was intentional. A fragile buffer so I could breathe, think, and not be pulled back into the familiar spiral. I picked up the receiver, my heart beating slowly but heavily. "Hello?" There was a very brief pause on the other end of the line. Then I heard my daughter's voice, Lauren's voice, but not the voice I had heard the last time outside the house in the snowstorm. "Mom, it's me." Her voice was softer, more careful, as if every word had been weighed before being spoken. I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to react on instinct. I just held the receiver tightly and listened to my own breathing. "I've been looking for you these past few days," Lauren continued. I was worried about you. Worried about me. The words sounded strange. 3 days ago, I was a burden to be removed. 3 days later, I had become someone to worry about. The change came too fast for me to believe it was natural. "I asked around everywhere," she went on, her voice trembling slightly. "I finally found out you're staying at a shelter. Oh my God, Mom, why didn't you call me?" I closed my eyes. I could picture her face clearly as she said that. the face of someone playing concern very well, but I had lived with her long enough to know the difference between genuine worry and purposeful worry. "I'm sorry," Lauren said quickly, as if afraid I would interrupt. "I've been thinking a lot. About that day, about what I said. I was under too much pressure. Everything hit at once." I stayed silent. "The kids miss you so much." She shifted her tone, noticeably softer. "Tommy asks every night where Grandma is, the one who reads to him, and little Emily keeps an empty chair in the living room, saying it's for Grandma when she comes back." I bit my lip, not because I was moved, but because I recognized that familiar tactic. When money couldn't move me, Lauren always knew exactly what to use. "Mom," she said, almost whispering, "no matter what happens, we're still family. Family doesn't abandon each other." Family. That word coming from my daughter's mouth now no longer carried the sacred meaning I once believed in. It sounded like a key, meant to reopen a door she, herself, had slammed shut. "I want you to come home," Lauren said directly after a brief pause. "Home is still your home. I've been thinking these past few days. I can't let you live in a place like that." I opened my eyes and looked at the wall in front of me. Pale beige, a thin crack running along the edge of the ceiling. The silence was so complete I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. "I'll rearrange everything," Lauren said. "We'll figure something out. Jason agrees too. You just need to come back." Jason agrees. I remembered my son-in-law sitting on the couch, beer can in hand, eyes glued to the screen, when I dragged my suitcase out of the house. I couldn't recall him looking at me even once that day. "I'll come pick you up," Lauren continued, as if afraid I might refuse. "Even tonight if you want." I took a deep breath. Something in her voice didn't sit right. Too rushed, too eager, as if she were afraid I might disappear again. "Lauren," I said at last. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. "How did you know I was here?" There was a very brief silence on the other end of the line, but it was long enough. I asked around," she replied. "Someone I know, at church." I didn't ask more. I didn't need to press. I had heard what I needed to hear, or rather, what she hadn't said. She knew more than she was admitting. "I heard that you saw a doctor," Lauren said quietly. "Had some tests done?" My heart tightened slightly, but my face didn't change. "At a shelter, everyone has to get a health check," I replied. "That's nothing unusual." "Yeah, I was just asking," she said quickly. Then she rushed back into her familiar tone. "I'm just worried about you. Really." I didn't argue. I didn't expose anything either. I let the silence stretch between us. In that silence, I observed, not my daughter, but my own reaction. I no longer felt the urge to explain, no longer felt the need to be understood. There was only a cold clarity, like a lake frozen over after many days of deep frost. "Can I come pick you up?" Lauren asked again for the third time. "Not for now," I said. "I need more time." "Time?" Her voice wavered. "Time for what? You're staying in a place—" "I'm safe," I cut in, keeping my voice steady. "I have a place to sleep. There are people helping." I heard a sharp breath on the other end. I imagined Lauren pressing her lips together, trying to stay composed. "You're angry with me," she said. It wasn't a question. I thought for a few seconds. "I'm not angry," I replied. "I'm just observing." "Observing what?" Lauren asked, her voice rising. "Observing who truly misses me," I said. "And for what reason?" I heard Lauren swallow. "You're overthinking things again," she said, irritation creeping in. "You always do that. You imagine things." I gave a faint smile. That was the line she always used whenever I got too close to the truth. "Lauren," I said slowly, I didn't say I'm not coming back. I just said, not yet. I hung up before she could respond. I stood there, the receiver still warm in my hand, and felt one thing very clearly. That call didn't come from pure longing. It carried worry, but not worry for me. Worry about something that might be about to happen. That evening, I didn't go to sleep right away. I sat on the bunk bed, opened my small handbag, and took out the old notebook I always carried with me. It had been with me for years, filled with to-do lists, numbers, things I didn't want to forget. I opened to a blank page. For the first time, I didn't write about bills. I didn't write about having to apologize to anyone. I wrote only one line. Say nothing more. Observe. Keep it secret. I didn't know exactly how much Lauren had found out, but I knew one thing for certain. She wasn't looking for me just because of family, and if she thought I was still the woman who would rush back just because of the word family, then this time she had misjudged me. Outside the window, the wind grew stronger. Snow hit the glass with dry, sharp sounds. I pulled the blanket up, lay down, and in that familiar darkness, I began preparing for what came next, not with impulsiveness, but with silence. Silence this time was my weapon. The first treatment was scheduled for Monday morning. I woke up very early, even before the hallway lights came on. Not from anxiety, but because my body was used to waking early after decades of routine. I folded my blanket, got dressed, and sat waiting in silence, listening to the familiar sounds of the shelter slowly waking up. Hannah arrived to pick me up right on time. In the car, she spoke very little, only asking if I was okay, if I needed to stop. I answered briefly. My mind had no room left for wandering thoughts. Everything felt unusually focused, as if I were stepping into a task that simply needed to be done. At the hospital, everything moved quickly but carefully. I was led into a private treatment room, brighter and quieter than I had expected. A reclining chair stood in the center, next to machines with neatly coiled transparent tubes. The familiar disinfectant smell was there, but it no longer overwhelmed me, like it had the first time I entered the ICU. Margaret was already there when I arrived. She stood up immediately, relief flickering in her eyes when she saw me. "Thank you for coming," she said sincerely, without a trace of politeness for show. I nodded, unsure how to respond adequately. As I sat down in the chair, the nurse began preparing. The needle, the tubing, the precise, practiced movements. I looked up at the ceiling, where the white lights shone more gently than I had expected. I breathed evenly, trying to keep my body relaxed. While waiting for the machine to start, I turned my head toward the large glass window separating the treatment room from the ICU outside. Through the glass, I could see Richard's room. He lay there just as before, unmoving. But today, as I looked more closely, a strange feeling crept into me, a vague familiarity with no clear source. I had seen many faces in my life, at work, at Lauren's school, in the old neighborhood, but this wasn't like logically recognizing someone. It was like hearing a melody you haven't heard in years, and before you can remember its name, your heart sinks over something very old. I studied his face through the glass. The silver hair, the features thinned by illness, but still familiar, especially the eyebrows and the straight bridge of his nose. I didn't say anything, telling myself I was imagining things. My mind had been overloaded these past few days. The treatment began. I felt my blood being drawn out, passing through the machine, then returning to my body. It didn't hurt, just a slight fatigue, like after a long workday. Margaret sat nearby, hands resting on her handbag, back straight, eyes never leaving me. She didn't speak, only offering the faintest smiles now and then, as if to reassure me. "Are you feeling uncomfortable?" a nurse asked. "No," I replied. "I'm fine." In that slow, quiet time, thoughts I hadn't named began to surface. Old images, very old, ones I believed had been buried under layers of responsibility and years, suddenly came into focus. A summer afternoon, blazing sunlight, a tall, thin young man with a bright smile leaning against a wooden fence, the sound of cicadas, the smell of dry grass. My heart skipped a beat. Impossible, I told myself. That couldn't be it. But when I looked again at Richard, not the present face on the hospital bed, but the features hidden beneath age, the memory took on clearer shape. I remembered a name I hadn't thought of in a very long time, a name I once promised myself I would forget so I could keep living. Richard. Not Bennett, just Richard. I remembered being 19. I remembered afternoons after school, conversations that stretched on until we lost track of time. I remembered being looked at with eyes full of trust and promise. I remembered a young man telling me, "Someday we'll have the whole world." But the world didn't wait for us. My family went through a crisis back then. My mother became seriously ill. I had to leave school and start working early, stay in our small town while Richard received a scholarship and left. We wrote letters to each other for a while. Then the letters grew fewer. Not because the love faded, but because life pulled each of us in different directions, relentlessly. I never knew what happened to Richard after that. I got married. I had Lauren. I stayed so busy there was no space left for unanswered questions. And over time, that memory was tucked away in a very deep corner, one I no longer touched, until now. A chill ran down my spine. I turned to Margaret. She was looking at me, her eyes gentle but sharp, as if she had noticed the change in me. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. I nodded, but my throat tightened. I didn't know what I should ask, or whether I should ask anything at all. I was afraid of breaking this fragile balance, afraid that if I spoke it out loud, everything would become complicated in ways I couldn't foresee. But Margaret spoke first. "Perhaps Richard feels familiar to you," she said very slowly. Not as a question, but as a gentle confirmation. I looked at her, my heart pounding. "I'm not sure," I replied. "It's just a feeling." Margaret gave a sad smile. "He once told me about someone," she said, "a long time before he met me." I held my breath. "A girl from his old hometown," she continued. "He said she was his first love, the person he never forgot." I felt my hand tremble slightly on the armrest. All the sounds around us seemed to fade away. Only Margaret's voice remained, clear down to every word. "He tried to find you," Margaret said, "many years ago, but he couldn't." I closed my eyes. The years of silence, the letters that were never answered, the questions that were never asked. All of it suddenly came together into a picture I hadn't known I was missing. "You knew about this?" I asked, my voice rough. Margaret nodded. "I knew," she said, "from the very beginning. Richard never hid it from me. He was always honest." There was no jealousy in her voice, no resentment, only the quiet acceptance of someone who had lived long enough to understand that love isn't always about possession. "He loves me," Margaret went on very firmly, "and I know that. But I also know there's a part of his heart that belongs to the past. I never saw that as a threat." Tears spilled over before I could stop them, not from pain, but from a feeling that was too full. A deep, quiet emotion stretched across more than 40 years, finally finding its name. Margaret's kindness left me stunned. She didn't look at me as someone intruding on her marriage. She looked at me as an old piece of her husband's life, one that had unexpectedly returned at a moment no one could have predicted. Maybe. It isn't a coincidence, Margaret said softly, glancing toward the ICU room, that you're the one who can help him. I looked at Richard, the man who had once been the young man standing by a wooden fence, the man I had loved, then lost, then buried in memory. Now his life was tied to my blood in a way no one could have planned with reason. In that moment, I understood something very clearly. This wasn't just about money, not just a deal, not just a chance for me to stand on my own again. This was a circle closing after more than 40 years. A connection I thought was lost had only been sleeping. And for the first time since my life collapsed in that snowstorm, I felt like I was standing in the right place, not as someone being used, but as part of something larger than my own losses. The treatment machine let out a soft beep, signaling the first phase was complete. I opened my eyes and took a deep breath. I knew I would continue, without hesitation, without turning back. Lauren didn't wait long. Just 2 days after the second treatment, while my body was still tired and my mind hadn't fully returned to its normal rhythm, she showed up, without notice, without asking, as if her patience had completely run out. That afternoon was dull and gray. I was sitting in the shelter's common room, halfway through an old book borrowed from the library. Outside the glass doors, the snow had stopped falling, but the sky still felt heavy, as if it wasn't ready for any thaw yet. The front desk worker approached me carefully. "Ms. Evelyn, someone is here to see you. Says she's your daughter." I closed the book and set it on the table. I wasn't surprised. Just a familiar chill settled in. The kind you feel when you know pain is coming but still have to face it. Lauren stood in the lobby wearing the expensive beige coat I remembered clearly, one I had helped pay for 2 years ago as a birthday gift. Light makeup, neatly styled hair. She didn't look like someone searching for her mother after days apart. She looked like someone arriving to deal with unfinished business. "Mom," Lauren said when she saw me. Her voice was no longer soft like it had been on the phone, polite but cold. "Lauren," I replied, nodding. There was no hug, no, "Are you okay?" She glanced around, her eyes sweeping quickly over the worn chairs and peeling paint, as if the very presence of this place made her uncomfortable. "We need to talk," Lauren said flatly, "in private." I followed her outside. It was cold, but not as biting as the day I was thrown out of the house. We stood near the parking lot where the wind rushed through open spaces. Lauren opened her handbag and pulled out a neatly clipped stack of papers. "I don't want to go in circles," she said. "I spoke to a friend who works in the legal field." I looked at the papers in her hand. I didn't ask anything. I waited. "What you're doing," Lauren continued, her voice growing firmer, "is legally complicated. You're involved in an experimental treatment. There's money involved, a lot of money." I looked straight into her eyes. "And you need protection," Lauren said quickly. "You're in a vulnerable state. You just lost your job. You've been emotionally traumatized. It's very easy for someone to take advantage of you." I let out a quiet laugh, not because it was funny, but because I recognized that tone. It was the voice of someone speaking for me, but not for my benefit. "What are you trying to say?" I asked. Lauren held the papers out toward me. "I think it's best if you sign these." I didn't take them. "What are they?" "Temporary power of attorney," Lauren replied. "It allows me to manage financial decisions related to that money on your behalf." I looked at my hands, thin hands, spotted with age. Hands that had worked nonstop for 30 years held her as a child, signed hundreds of documents over a lifetime, and yet had never trembled like this. Not from fear, but from a very different kind of pain. "Manage it for me," I repeated slowly. "Yes," Lauren said. "You're not used to handling amounts like that. I have more experience. I just want to make sure everything is handled properly. Taxes, legal responsibility, risks if there are disputes." "You're talking as if I'm no longer capable of understanding things," I said. Lauren sighed, as if I were making things harder than they needed to be. "Mom, don't overreact. This is just a precaution." I looked at her very carefully, and for the first time, I no longer saw my daughter in her eyes. I saw a stranger, someone weighing benefits, calculating moves, trying to control something she believed was slipping away. "Who did you talk to?" I asked. Lauren hesitated for a second. "A lawyer. I don't want you getting into trouble." "Your lawyer," I corrected. She didn't deny it. "Lauren," I said, word by word, "do you remember the last time you asked me what I wanted?" She frowned. "This isn't the time to bring up the past." "For you, maybe not," I replied. "But for me, it is." Lauren grew impatient. "Mom, I'm trying to help you, but if you don't cooperate, things could get complicated." "How complicated?" I asked. She looked at me, her eyes noticeably colder. "If necessary, I could request an evaluation of your capacity. You're being influenced by outsiders. People might think you were manipulated." The word landed between us like a blade. Manipulated. I felt something inside me finally snap. Not just now, but the delayed breaking of a relationship that had been cracked for a long time. "What did you just say?" I asked quietly. "You know what I mean," Lauren replied without backing down. "I just want everything clear before it's too late." I nodded, slowly, calmly. So calmly it surprised even me. "So you didn't come here because you miss me," I said. "You came because you're afraid of losing control." "That's not true," Lauren protested immediately, but her voice lacked conviction. "Would you be looking for me," I continued, "if there wasn't that money?" Her silence answered for her. In that moment, I understood very clearly. Lauren no longer saw me as her mother. She saw me as a variable, a risk, an asset that needed to be controlled. I didn't take the papers. I didn't argue further. "You should go," I said. "I need time to think." "You can't make decisions on your own," Lauren snapped. "I'm clear-headed enough to know I'm not signing anything today," I cut in, "and you don't have the right to force me." Lauren stared at me for a few seconds, then shoved the papers back into her bag. "I'm just trying to do the right thing," she said coldly. "Don't regret this later." She turned and walked quickly toward her car. I stood there, the wind cutting against my face, realizing that the greatest pain wasn't being thrown out of the house. It was being treated as someone no longer fit to own her own life. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the bunk bed, opened my old notebook, and turned to a fresh page. This time, I wrote more than one line. I wrote, "Find a lawyer, independently, not connected to Lauren." The next morning, I asked Hannah to recommend an independent law office. She didn't ask many questions, just looked at me with understanding. Perhaps she'd seen this scenario too many times before. The lawyer's name was Daniel Brooks, around 50 years old. He spoke slowly and clearly. He listened as I told my story, without interrupting, without judging. When I finished, he nodded. "You have every right to protect yourself," he said, "and the first step is making sure no one can use concern as a reason to take away your right to decide. We completed a formal capacity declaration. Clear, thorough, no ambiguity. We drafted a temporary will, not because I thought I was about to die, but because I understood that when money appears, so does greed. For the first time in my life, I signed documents not to serve someone else, but to protect myself. When I left the law office, I walked slowly along the sidewalk dusted with thin snow. It was cold, yet my chest felt strangely warm. I had lost many things, but at least I was no longer a woman anyone could step on in the name of family. And for the first time in many years, I knew one thing for certain. I was standing on my own side. The 5th treatment took place on a morning that was unusually quiet. No snow, no rain, just a thin layer of clouds covering the city sky, softening the light that filtered into the hospital like diluted watercolor. I arrived earlier than usual, sat in the familiar waiting room, my small bag in my hands, feeling a calm I hadn't expected. My body had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the treatments. The fatigue was still there, but it no longer frightened me. I understood the light dizziness, the moments of weakness, and the hollow feeling after each blood draw weren't signs of loss, but of a process moving in the right direction. I no longer thought about money when I entered the treatment room. Strangely enough, that was true. I thought about something else. Something softer, deeper. Margaret arrived shortly after me. She wore a light gray sweater, her hair neatly tied back. Her eyes looked different that day, less worn, more hopeful, as if a small light had been lit inside her, bright enough to guide the way. The doctor said some of the numbers look very promising, she said softly as she sat beside me. We'll know more after today. I nodded. I didn't ask anything further. I had learned that some things don't need to be spoken aloud to matter. Margaret's silence then wasn't worry. It was waiting. Inside the treatment room, the machine started up, producing steady, familiar sounds. The nurse checked the readings and took careful notes. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Each time the needle touched my skin, I thought about the years I had endured in silence, not from submission, but because I once believed it was the only way to love. This time, I let my thoughts drift gently. I thought of a long ago afternoon in a small town where Richard and I once sat by the river, talking about big dreams and the voices of people who still believed time was always on their side. I thought of the years I spent being a mother, an employee, the stable woman in everyone's eyes, yet never truly asking myself whether I was happy. When the treatment ended, a nurse hurried into the room, her expression unusual. She looked at Margaret first, then at me. "Please wait a moment," she said. "The doctor wants to see you right away." My heart tightened slightly, not from fear, but from a very strong intuition. Margaret stood up, her hand trembling faintly. I followed her out down the long hallway leading back to the ICU. Each step seemed slower than usual, as if the space itself were stretching to test our patience. Dr. Bennett stood outside the room, his face serious but his eyes bright. He didn't waste time. "There's a response," he said. "A clear one." Margaret raised a hand to cover her mouth. For a few seconds, my mind went completely blank. "What kind of response?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Increased neurological activity," the doctor replied. "We've seen steady improvement over the past 2 days, but this morning it was stronger, much stronger." He opened the door and gestured for us to come in. Richard lay there, still thin, still connected to the familiar machines. But something had changed. I noticed it immediately, even before the doctor said anything more. His eyelids twitched, not a random reflex, a deliberate movement. Margaret gripped my hand tightly. "Richard," she called, her voice breaking. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, his eyes opened very slowly, very heavily, as if he had to pull an entire ruined world out of a long sleep to return. The air in the room froze. "Richard," Margaret whispered, tears spilling over. He looked around, his gaze cloudy, disoriented. Then his eyes stopped, not on Margaret, not on the doctor, but on me. I stood there, my heart pounding. I didn't move. I didn't dare breathe too deeply. His lips moved slightly, no sound. Then again. This time, very softly, very weak, but enough for me to hear. "Evelyn." The entire room erupted. Margaret broke into sobs. The doctor turned, signaling the medical team. Nurses rushed in. Equipment was adjusted. Rapid medical instructions filled the air. But all those sounds felt distant to me. He said my name, not Margaret. Not a mistaken name. It was me. The name no one had spoken in that voice for more than 40 years. I stepped closer, my hands trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the bed. "I'm here," I said softly. "I'm here." His eyes focused more clearly, sharper. A very faint, very weak smile appeared, but it was the smile I remembered. The smile of the young man who once said we would have the whole world. "I knew," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "I knew you'd be here." I couldn't hold back my tears, not from pain, not from regret, but from something pure, being seen, being remembered, being called by name, not out of obligation, but out of feeling. The Bennett family stood around the bed. I saw emotional faces, reddened eyes. There was no discomfort, no suspicious glances. No one asked why he had called my name. No one asked me to step back. No one mentioned money. Margaret turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she smiled. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for bringing him back." I shook my head. "No," I said. "We did this together." Over the next few hours, Richard became more alert. He didn't speak much. Each sentence required enormous effort, but he held Margaret's hand. He looked at his children. He looked at me, as if trying to memorize every detail, afraid that if he blinked, it would all disappear. No one asked anything of me. No one asked how long I would continue treatment, how I would receive the money, or what I planned to do next. No one mentioned responsibility or obligation. I wasn't placed in a position where I had to repay anything. For the first time in a very long while, I was simply present, and that was enough. That evening, I sat alone in my small room at the shelter, looking out the window. Streetlights cast a golden glow over the thin layer of snow. I thought about Lauren, about the stack of power of attorney papers, about the way she had looked at me as something that needed to be controlled. Then I thought about Margaret, about the way she held my hand, about how the Bennett family stood around the hospital bed without asking a single question about me except whether I was okay. And I understood. Real family doesn't come from blood or beautiful words. It comes from respect, from not treating someone as a means to get what you want. I had lived too long in a family where love always came with conditions. And now, standing before an undeniable miracle, I finally realized how many years I had confused obligation with love. Richard had woken up, but the one who truly awakened was me. The news that Lauren had lost her house reached me on a morning that seemed perfectly ordinary. I was sitting in the small room at the shelter, organizing a few personal belongings, when my phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering, no longer rushing the way I used to. "Hello?" Lauren's voice came through immediately, hoarse and urgent. No small talk, no awkward greetings. "Mom, I don't have a place to live anymore." I closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair. I had sensed this would happen. I just hadn't expected it to come so soon. "The bank foreclosed on the house," Lauren went on, her breathing rapid. "Jason, he really lost his job this time. For real. We can't manage anymore." I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch. Not as punishment, but to hear everything my daughter was trying to say and everything she wasn't. "Mom," Lauren lowered her voice, sounding weaker. "I know I was wrong. I know I said things I shouldn't have. But now we really need you." The sentence fell into the familiar space between us, just as it had so many times before. The only difference was that this time, I didn't rush to fill it. "What about the kids?" I asked evenly. Lauren seemed ready for that question. "Tommy and Emily, they're panicking, Mom. They don't understand what's happening. Tommy cries all night. Emily keeps asking when we can go back to the old house." My throat tightened. Images of the two children came sharply into focus. Our evenings reading together, the mornings I made breakfast before work. They weren't at fault. I knew that better than anyone. "Mom," Lauren said, her voice beginning to tremble deliberately, "you can't abandon your grandchildren. No matter what, you're still their grandmother." Grandmother. Not mother, not family. A role. One I was reminded of whenever emotions needed to be stirred. "What do you want?" I asked. Lauren was silent for a few seconds, then spoke quickly, as if afraid I might change my mind. "Just help us temporarily. You're in a better position now. Just for a while. Until we get back on our feet." I opened my eyes and looked out the window. Pale sunlight. Most of the snow on the sidewalk had melted, leaving gray streaks of water. Winter was retreating, but melting doesn't always bring relief. "Lauren," I said slowly, "do you remember the last time you told me you couldn't support another person who doesn't earn money?" Her voice stalled. "Mom." I already apologized. "Did you apologize because you were afraid of losing money," I continued, "or because you truly understood what you did?" Lauren hesitated. "I don't know how to say it so you'll believe me." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I believe you're scared," I said. "I believe you're desperate, but I don't believe you've changed." "I have changed," Lauren said loudly, almost pleading. "Can't you see? I'm calling you. I'm begging." "Begging," I repeated. "Or bargaining." There was no immediate answer. I heard Lauren breathe heavily, then her voice shifted to a different tone, softer, lower. "Mom," she said, "you can endure this, but the kids can't. Do you want them sleeping on someone else's couch? Growing up, feeling abandoned?" That sentence struck the deepest part of me. I felt a pain I knew all too well. The pain of a woman who once sacrificed everything so her child wouldn't lack anything. It pulled me back years, to the days I worked 2 jobs, to the times I skipped meals so Lauren could pay tuition. I stayed silent for a long time, not because I was wavering, but because I needed to be sure where I stood. "Lauren," I said finally, "do you know why I didn't come back home that day?" "Because you were angry," she answered quickly. "No," I said, "because I realized something." "What?" "That if I keep rescuing you from the consequences of your choices," I said clearly, word by word, "you will never learn how to take responsibility for your own life." "But this time is different," Lauren pleaded. "This time it's for the kids." I closed my eyes. Images of Tommy and Emily rose again. My heart hurt, truly hurt. But the pain no longer disoriented me. "I love my grandchildren," I said. "That hasn't changed." Then, "But I won't return to the role of unconditional rescuer," I cut in. "Not for you, not for anyone." "So you're going to let them be homeless?" Lauren snapped, anger creeping in. "No," I replied. "You and Jason are adults. You can find solutions. A smaller apartment, different jobs, community assistance. Many families have had to do the same." "But you have money," Lauren blurted out. "You could fix everything with just one check." "And then what?" I asked. "Then you'd make decisions for me again. Calculate how much I'm worth. Remind me that family only exists when it's convenient." Lauren fell silent. I heard her crying, not an outburst, but tight, frustrated sobs. "You're cruel," Lauren said. "You've changed." I opened my eyes and looked straight at the light outside the window. "Yes," I said, "I have changed." "Before, you would never say no," Lauren went on. "No matter what, you would help." "Before, I was afraid of being abandoned," I replied. "Now I'm not." The words rang clearly inside me, not as a declaration, but as an accepted truth. "I don't hate you," I added, my voice softening, "but I can't keep sacrificing myself so you can feel secure." "Then who are you choosing?" Lauren asked, her voice turning cold. "Those strangers?" I gave a sad smile. "I'm choosing myself." The call ended quietly. No goodbye. Just a long pause, and then Lauren hung up. I set the phone down on the table. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten the way I had expected. There was real sadness. Sadness for my daughter, for my grandchildren, for what could have been different. But beneath that sadness was a steadiness I had never known before. For the first time in my life, I said no without guilt, without feeling selfish, without feeling ungrateful, without feeling like a bad mother. I simply felt like a woman who had lived long enough to understand that love does not mean self-destruction. That evening, I went to the hospital to visit Richard. He was speaking more. His voice was still weak, but his eyes were bright. Margaret sat beside the bed, holding his hand. They looked at me as I entered, smiling without conditions. "Are you okay?" Margaret asked. I nodded. "I am." And it wasn't a polite answer. I didn't turn back. And for the first time, I knew for sure I was moving in the right direction. I signed the papers to buy my house on an early spring morning, when the city still held scattered patches of old snow that hadn't fully melted yet. The air was cold, but the sunlight was different. No longer the heavy gray of winter, but a pale, clear light, like a reminder that everything can begin again. The house wasn't big. 2 small bedrooms, a living room just large enough for a sofa and a bookshelf, and a bright kitchen with a window looking out onto the backyard. Nothing luxurious, no white picket fence like in the movies. But when I stepped across the threshold for the first time with the keys in my hand, I knew with absolute clarity this was my home, not my daughter's house, not a place I was staying temporarily, not a roof tied to conditions, just a home, mine. I stood for a long time in the empty living room, listening to the soft echo of my footsteps on the newly polished wooden floor. The sound made me smile. For years, I had learned to walk quietly, to take up as little space as possible, to exist in a way that wouldn't inconvenience anyone. And now, my footsteps were allowed to be heard, without apology, without hesitation. I bought the house about a 10-minute walk from Richard and Margaret's place, not because I wanted to cling to them, but because I valued the right kind of closeness. Near, but not merged. Connected, but not dependent. Margaret helped me choose the curtains. Richard, once his health had improved, planted a few flower bushes with me in the front yard. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't need to. Some things once acknowledged don't need to be repeated. I moved into the new house quietly. No housewarming party, no announcements. Just Hannah helping me carry a few boxes and Margaret bringing over a tray of still warm pastries. "Welcome home," she said, setting the tray on the kitchen counter. I stood there, looking at the kitchen glowing in the afternoon light, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt the meaning of those words. In the days that followed, I began arranging my life according to my own rhythm. I woke up when I wanted. I made coffee the way I liked it, unhurried, without preparing it for anyone else. I read in the mornings, took walks in the afternoons, and cooked simple meals just to nourish myself, not to prove anything. Money, the thing that had once been the greatest anxiety of my life, was no longer the center of every thought. I used it carefully with planning, but I didn't let it control me. I paid off the small remaining debts from before. I bought better health insurance. I set aside some for short trips I had always told myself were unnecessary. But the most important thing wasn't the house or financial stability. It was a decision I made one quiet afternoon while sitting alone in my new living room. I opened my old notebook, the one that had followed me through my worst days, and wrote a new heading, "A Fund for Older Women." The idea didn't come from ambition or a desire for praise. It came from the image of Rosa, the woman I had met at the shelter, from the faces I had seen on cold nights, women who had once had families, once worked their whole lives, and then one day were treated as expendable. I knew that feeling. I had lived it. My fund wasn't large. I didn't build a grand organization. I simply created a small fund, enough to help a few women with rental deposits, enough to cover a few legal consultations, enough to give them time to stand on their feet before being swept away. I named it Second Dawn, not because I thought I was saving anyone, but because I believed no one should be denied the chance to begin again just because they had already lived too many years. I met those women in my kitchen. We drank tea. We talked. Not as victims, but as people who had lived long enough to understand that life can be cruel. But it doesn't always have to end in the worst way. Some cried. Some were angry. Some stayed silent for a long time before daring to tell their stories. I didn't fix them. I just listened. And sometimes that was enough. Lauren didn't call me anymore. News about her reached me through others, through a distant relative, through bits of overheard conversation. She and Jason moved into a smaller apartment. The kids changed schools. Their life was difficult, but it went on. I thought about my grandchildren often. I wrote them short letters. No blame, no explanations, just telling them about Grandma's little front garden, about the stray cat I fed every morning, about afternoons spent reading on the porch. I didn't know whether Lauren gave them the letters or not, but I kept writing. Not to pull them back, but to keep my love from turning into resentment. One afternoon, while I was watering the plants in the yard, Richard stopped by. He walked slowly, but his posture was steadier. We sat on the front steps, watching the sun sink behind the roof across the street. "Do you regret anything?" he asked softly. I thought for a moment. "Yes," I said. "I regret living too long out of obligation." Richard nodded as if he had already understood. "But you don't do that anymore." "No," I said. "I don't. I don't live to play the role of the perfect mother. I don't live to be recognized as a self-sacrificing woman. I don't live to keep the peace by staying silent. I live for myself. I choose the meals I like. I choose the house I live in. I choose to help when I want to, not when I'm pressured. I choose to say yes and no based on clarity, not on the fear of being abandoned. My new life isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, but it's steady, like a tree that has taken deep root after a storm. And for the first time, I don't feel the need to apologize for that. I don't run from the past. I don't deny the years I sacrificed. I simply put them where they belong, behind me. Ahead of me is a life I chose for myself. Many years have passed since the winter day I stood on my daughter's porch, snow covering my shoulders, the door slamming shut behind me like a cold verdict. Time didn't erase that memory, but it changed its shape. No longer sharp like broken glass, it became a faded scar, a reminder that I was once hurt and that I survived. My life now is peaceful in a very ordinary way. Every morning, I wake up in my small house and open the window to let sunlight into the kitchen. I make coffee, water the plants on the porch, listen to birds perched on the wooden fence. There's no packed schedule, no one I need to prove anything to. I read, walk, cook, and occasionally drive to visit Margaret and Richard. Visits without obligation, only voluntary presence. Richard has nearly fully recovered. We sit on their porch on long afternoons, talking about small things, the weather, a good book, the morning news. Sometimes we sit in silence for a long time, and that silence no longer makes me feel lacking. It's full in its own way. We don't try to make up for the past. We let it rest, like an old photograph kept in a drawer, still there, but not something we need to take out every day. I still think about Lauren, not with anger, but with a mature sadness. I understand that she carries her own fears, fear of scarcity, fear of failure, fear of losing control. But I no longer allow those fears to decide my life. I love her the way a mother learns to love after many losses, with love, but with boundaries. I still love my grandchildren. That has never changed. I keep photos of Tommy and Emily on my bookshelf, 2 gap-toothed smiles, 2 little faces that used to press against my shoulder every night. I send birthday gifts regularly. I write letters. Not long, not heavy, just lines about the garden, about the cat I named Hope, about simple things I want them to know. Grandma is still here, still loving, but no longer hurting herself to be loved in return. Those boundaries aren't easy to keep. Some nights I lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'm selfish. But every time that question surfaces, I remember the woman I once was, the one who did everything for her child and was then erased from her child's life like an unnecessary expense. On my first night at the shelter, I promised myself I would never let anyone step on me again. And I've kept that promise, not with bitterness, but with clarity. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves began to turn yellow and a cool breeze passed over the porch, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I answered with the calm habit formed over the years. "Grandma?" A small, hesitant voice said. My heart stuttered. I knew that voice even before my mind could catch up. "Tommy?" I asked, my voice trembling just slightly. "Yes," he said. I found your number in the contacts. Mom doesn't know." I sat down in the chair, gripping the phone tightly. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," he said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." That one sentence dissolved every defense I had. I closed my eyes, letting the autumn wind brush my cheek and listen to every breath of the grandchild I had missed every day. We didn't talk long, about his new school, about math, which he didn't like, about Grandma's cat. He didn't ask why I didn't come back to live with the family. He didn't blame me. He was simply there. And that presence planted a small but steady hope inside me. After the call, I sat on the porch for a long time. Leaves drifted down onto the walkway. I understood then that seeds of love never disappear completely. They just need time and soil that isn't trampled by obligation or guilt to grow again. I don't regret it. I don't regret saying no. I don't regret choosing myself. If there's anything I regret, it's only that I didn't do it sooner. But life doesn't give us a rewind button. It only gives us choices from this moment forward. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't hurt anyone to prove I was right. I lived better, and that was my choice and the only answer I needed. I built a life where I am respected, where help is voluntary, where family is not a chain. Now, looking back, I understand that I lost one family, a family where love came with conditions. But I found myself again, the woman who has the right to choose how to live, how to love, and how to move forward. I'm telling this story not to blame anyone. I'm telling it to remember that sometimes leaving isn't running away, it's returning to yourself. And maybe, somewhere in this story, you see a part of yourself too. What city are you listening from? If you've ever been treated like a burden, please remember, your worth does not live in anyone else's wallet or decisions. Leave a comment. I truly want to know your story. Thank you for staying until the end. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, please like, subscribe, and stay with me. I still have so much more to tell.